Hey, good morning, everybody. Yeah, that's right. It's another week. It's Monday. You survived the weekend. And today, I believe, will be day 70 of the United States of America versus Gilligan's Island, versus the Joe Biggs and the Proud Boys. It only feels like Gilligan's Island or the Hotel California. You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. We were hoping at one point to give the closing arguments this week, and it's possible that it'll happen. But as the week
Hey, Norm,
begins,
just while I'm looking at this, it appears that for whatever reason, I need to redo the stream key for Rumble. So
we're not on. Okay.
well, we are on YouTube and we are on Twitter.
Mhm.
So we're live there, but I just got a notification. So let me see if I can edit the stream key here, but keep going and then we'll welcome everybody else in
All right.
when we get it added.
So as you've heard, folks, technological difficulties obtain. If you're here on YouTube, I have to be careful what I say because we don't want to get a YouTube stripe lest we offend the algorithm. And if you're on Twitter, thank you for finding us on Twitter. I guess Mike is going to reboot on Rumble. As I was saying, day 70 of the Proud Boys trial today. The jury will be back in the room, and the cross-examination of one of the Proud Boys, Zachary Rell, president of the Philadelphia chapter, will resume tomorrow or the next day. Dominic Pizzolo will testify, and that will likely be a wrap. It doesn't appear at this point as though the government intends to put on a rebuttal case, but I suppose anything is possible. As the week ended last week, we were hoping to close this week. That is to give closing arguments. And for those
we are live on Rumble now. So just to welcome everybody back in. Sorry about that. I think stream key was invalid for whatever reason on Rumble. I got a backup pulled together, so we're live there now. So for everybody just joining, Norm was giving a recap of last week in the Proud Boys trial. Day 70 is today. So Norm, sorry to interrupt. Welcome everybody on Rumble. You can blame me.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Yeah, so it's all Mike's fault. I mean, the goddess Techne governs the universe, and our instantiation of Techne in the world is Mike. We had technological issues, but we're back now, and screw Techne. Just kidding, of course. But in any case, we will hope to stumble through the conclusion of testimony in the Proud Boys case. We hope to give closing arguments this week. Chatter in the group texts over the weekend had people wondering whether we wouldn't close until the following week. I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to go home. But that's up to the judge, I suppose. Lots in the news this week. The Dominion trial was supposed to take place today. Dominion versus Fox News, set for a Delaware courtroom. Late last night, the trial judge gave a cryptic note on the electronic system that lawyers obsessively check for notices from the court, saying that the trial today was being postponed by one day, and the judge would give an announcement at 9 o'clock this morning. Those close to the case, according to reporters, are saying that settlement discussions are underway between Dominion and Fox. I find the Sunday evening ruling from the judge, or marginal ruling, notation ruling, delaying the case for a day, to be pretty bizarre. You're not going to typically say of jury, you invite a jury panel in on a given day in federal court, and then you select from those members, from the panel, those who you want to question later. You typically release them after a day. And so my hunch is the judge was probably told the case is going to settle, because I doubt very seriously that they'd let 100 people come into the court on Monday and then tell them all, you got to come back tomorrow. There'd be an exceptional amount of grumbling about that. The court has the inherent authority to do that, and that could happen. But, should the case settle? Maybe. You'll recall what the case is about. Fox News, in the wake of the 2020 election, was reporting as though it were a fact that the election had been stolen and had been captured, as it were, by mouthpieces for then President Trump and then former President Trump, as he advanced the narrative that the elections were stolen. The Fox personalities were reporting this as fact and taking the likes of Miss the Kraken Queen, I'm drawing a blank on her name, and Rudy Giuliani and so forth, and reporting their assertions as fact, while privately sending one another notes that these folks had screws loose, that the claims that the elections was stolen were false, but they were reporting on their premium shows the claims that the election was stolen. And so, I'm trying to be careful and choose my words carefully and report this in a neutral fashion. The question arises whether they defamed Dominion, because you'll recall at one point that the claim was that Dominion was, owned by foreign interests, and the same interests that had created these machines to throw an election to Cesar Chavez, and that somehow election results were tampered with in the United States, and this election was stolen from Donald Trump. And so from Dominion's perspective, selling as it does the service of processing votes, its reputation as a reliable counter of votes was undermined, and it brought an action against Fox for defamation, that is, for doing damage to its reputation. In its pleadings, it sought and seeks $1.6 billion in damages. And
That's a familiar number.
Yeah. Did they get that from the Alex Jones pleadings, I wonder?
Does Fox get to put on a defense, or is that just going to be a default judgment?
Well, if this had gone to Barbara Bellis in Connecticut, we got so ordered. Oh, yeah, we forgot the trial. Okay, let's have a trial. So ordered. But, that number is a number in a normal courtroom that a plaintiff would have to prove. Dominion's gross revenues were some minor sum of that, 40-50 million a year. So it's unlikely they can prove damages in that range, but they probably, in my view, can prove damages. And let's talk about what's really at stake at the trial, and candidly, why I hope it settles. Defamation, what is it? Defamation is a statement, either oral or in writing, that harms the reputation of another. And a person whose reputation has been harmed by uttering things that are untrue about them in the marketplace of ideas can, if they can prove that the utterances are false and that the person uttering them knew them to be false, can obtain damages. And how you quantify damages to your reputation, that's a difficult exercise.
Yep. And defamation in general is one of the few exceptions to the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech.
And Mike as Mike points out, that's a great point. And you're thinking, well, how does defamation fit within the free speech regime? We have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom to engage in speech that's going to commit a crime. You can't, hey, look, let's go rob the bank, guys. Hey, wait a minute. You're charged with conspiracy to bank robbery. Freedom of speech, no, you can't conspire to commit crimes. That's against the law. Neither can you imminently call for violence. Let's go burn that building down right now. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to defame one another, to defame one another, or to injure other people gratuitously with false assertions of fact. Now, what is news? And what is news in our day? News is the reporting of facts and the hosting of individuals who give opinions. Thus, when you pick up a newspaper, you'll see the news pages, and you'll see the op-ed pages or the editorial page. Do newspapers get an exemption from defamation? Well, they don't. But there are high standards for newspapers. And it's understood that people reporting the news will sometimes get things wrong in ways that you or I might not. And thus, news organizations are, in order to protect their ability to report the news, and in order to engage in the robust debate that we want our newspapers to engage in, both in reporting of fact and in the reporting of opinion, there's a high standard that news organizations have to violate in order to be found liable for defamation. And that is, they have to act with actual malice. Actual malice means an indifference to the truth, a reckless disregard for the truth. What is recklessness? Reckless is being aware of a substantial danger of harm and not caring, proceeding nonetheless. Actual malice can mean hatred, can mean a willful desire to distort the truth for venal ends. And so there is a suggestion, which I believe to be true based on what I've read, that internally there were those behind the scenes at Fox who knew that peddling the stolen election claims was likely false, but they didn't care. because their base, that is their readership, their viewership, expected to hear this. And they were concerned about offending their base if they departed from this false narrative. So if Dominion can prove that case, and based on what I've read, they likely can, they will be able to get damages from Fox. Now, Fox is said to have $4 billion in reserve, in cash reserves. And so it could handle a $1.6 billion judgment if it were hit with that. I don't think that Dominion can prove damages in that range, however. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see a settlement today announced, or in the next couple of days, for $250 million. In fact, I'm going to make that prediction here that Dominion and Fox are going to settle the defamation claim for $250 million. And where does that number come from? If in fact Dominion's gross is 40 to 50 million a year, and they were harmed, their reputation was harmed as reliable purveyors of a service to count votes, make it for a 4-year cycle, for one electoral cycle in the presidential season. So 4 times whatever their annual revenue is my spider sense of what the settlement value of this case is. And I think it would be good for the case to settle, because, I don't want to see Fox destroyed. I want to see it chastened. I want to see it pushed back into the center, into a realm where there are such things as intersubjective truths. In other words, there are standards that we can all recognize for determining what is and is not true, and that they adhere to them. And if they want to have opinions that reality doesn't matter, well, then they can go ahead and have those opinions. But you can't have your own facts. There really aren't alternative facts. You'll recall that line famously being peddled by the Trump administration when it reported on the size of those coming to celebrate the inaugural. I think it was Sean Spicer who talked about alternative facts. We all know that there is an external world, a world independent of our desires and independent of our wishes, and that external world imposes constraints on what we can do in the world. And the process of knowing that world and of shaping that world and making that world into something that we want, that's the natural sciences, that's the social sciences, and that's the development of political consensus. And we rely on news and news organizations to report to us things that are taking place in the broader world around us. And we all wish that world would take shapes that conform to our desires. And hence we gather together in political parties and interest groups where like-minded people gather resources to try to influence events to make their dreams come true, as it were. But independent of my dreams is a crushing reality. And that reality contains such truths as, hey, it's tax week. And much though I may wish to identify as a tax-exempt organization, I will be writing a check to the IRS this week. And hey, I'm an older guy, and much though I wish I could live forever, my days are numbered. And hey, there are limited resources in the world, and we will argue about how to distribute them endlessly in our social and political institutions. And it seems to me that when we untether news organizations from a responsibility to have discernible standards for determining what is and isn't true, and let them cut straight to wish fulfillment, we tear at the body politic in ways that can only produce what we see around us now. That is warring tribes in silos, glaring with hatred at one another, because not everyone shares our truths, and a sense of entitlement that each group seeks to have its will imposed on the other, and the spirit of compromise and the spirit of living together in conditions of uncertainty is lost. So why would it be good for the Fox case to settle? Because in my view, Fox was wrong, and I think it should take its lumps. And rather than taking this case to trial and trying to defend the indefensible, that is, that lies were truth, it should accept the fact that there is an external reality and be disciplined in the marketplace and vow to its readers that it will do a better job of reporting on the truth in the weeks and months to come.
I've got a couple things here, Norm. So yeah. Thinking Man is in the chat, and good morning, Thinking Man, Jackie P, BTL, Lawyer Will. The crew is here.
Yo, Lawyer Will, what up?
Thinking Man says, how does the public win if Norm is correct with his prediction? It seems the Dominion family and the attorneys celebrate very well. So before you answer that, I'd like to make my own observation, which is going back to you discussing Sean Spicer's phraseology around alternative facts. It appears to me that due in large part to the velocity of information that is transacted on social media, that news in this day and age, these behemoths, Fox News, CNN, you name it, have become more encouraged from a financial perspective to dive into what we would consider to be entertainment. So if there's a proportion of facts reporting on one side and entertainment on the other, it feels very much, Norm, especially in the last 5 to 8 years, that proportion has gotten really out of whack, right? That news has become more entertainment by and through the big acronyms in media and in facts reporting, and due in large part to that, this defamation trial. Fox has the biggest pockets as it relates to someone or some entity who could have been alleged to have defamed Dominion voting. But for my part, it appears to me that Fox merely had its fingers on the pulse of what the counter chatter was all over social media and dove headlong into reporting directionally what the widespread criticism was of the election writ large.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and you've raised that point repeatedly. And there are problems with how we count the vote, and it may be that we need to have a better and more meaningful national debate about.
Well, no, my point is more attuned to this. If Dominion is able to substantiate damages, that's one thing. But I would be preoccupied as an attorney on this legal team with trying to make sure that the court is analyzing the source of defamation, as it were. Because for what I can see, Fox didn't arbitrage the Dominion voting thing. It wasn't a figment of Fox's creation. It was almost a part of the zeitgeist that Fox decided to try and own within that space. And fair enough, if the court decides that I don't need to go too far back to say that, you augmented it, you elevated it, this conversation is better had on the damages side of things, that's fine. But I think that is one element of this that's going missed. So going back to Thinking Man's question, Norm, because I think it's a good one. How is the public served as this settles?
Well, I want to just go back to a couple things you said before, talking about the line between news and entertainment. And as you said that, I made a note here. I said, let's talk about engagement. Social media has transformed how we consume information about the external world. When I came up as a kid, there was ABC, NBC, and CBS. And if you wanted to watch the news, those were one of the three that you did. And then suddenly there was PBS, and there was a fourth option. And within these organizations, there were editorial standards and efforts to verify facts and only to report on things that people could determine to be true. Social media has made every person their own editor, and what makes social media thrive is a sense of engagement. When there were maybe 3 entertainment or news organizations that competed with one another, they were competing within a fixed market, and there wasn't a lot of range in terms of what they could offer. Now that we have cable news and the internet and the opportunity to engage in our own silos, we can all create our own reality based on what we desire and or fear most. And we know from the engagement machines, Facebook, Twitter, and company, that what engages enrages. And so we've become an angrier people as the sources of our information seek to engage us, and they seek to engage us at the level of the lowest common denominator. That is what angers and fears us, and or makes us afraid, rather. And it becomes harder and harder and harder to approach something like a middle ground because compromise is boring. I'd rather extinguish my adversary than learn to talk to them. So how would the public, if this case settles, how would the public benefit? I think that's the question. My view is it would benefit because it would serve as a chastening for Fox, to the degree that it began to blur news and entertainment, or in the alternative, to the degree that it feared that by telling the truth it would lose engagement. It broke a social contract, a larger contract on which we all depend. Each and every one of us is going to presumably go out today and go about the business of making our living in a world bound by rules, norms, and settled expectations that we need to cultivate and nurture. If we're cultivating a sense of rage and anger and entitlement, we're tearing at the things that make it possible for us to live together and making our lives more difficult. If that's what Fox was doing, and I think there's an argument when you look at the internal memos, Gene Pirro and others talking about the Ms. Kraken, I'm still drawing a blank, Sidney Powell, as batshit crazy, but yet peddling her claims. Sidney Powell had an opportunity to test her theories about a stolen election. Donald Trump had an opportunity to test his theories about a stolen election. Rudy Giuliani had an opportunity. That was in a courtroom. And what takes place in a courtroom is parties make competing claims about the nature of reality and or truth. And they submit those claims to a process that is governed by rules of procedure, rules of evidence, and the substantive law of the case. Each and every one of the 62 or 63 claims that were brought about a stolen election failed. What that told me, and by the way, when I heard the claim, Cesar Chavez, Dominion, I don't know. I mean, I thought Sidney Powell was a highly credible lawyer based on the work that she'd done in some other cases. So let's take them to court. Let's take those claims to court where we have disciplined truth-finding functions. They all failed. That tells me there's no there. Fox apparently knew this, but still continued to report it as true, and then accused the judges, and accused the judiciary of somehow having its thumb on the scale, which in and of itself is profoundly delegitimizing. So I think that by Fox settling, by paying some sum to Dominion for the loss of revenue potentially associated with this attack on its reputation, it sends a signal to others in the marketplace that while we are free to speak, we are also accountable for the speech we utter, and that when you depart from the norms of pursuing the truth and you engage in malicious falsehood, that is not caring about the truth. You're reckless. You seek engagement for the sake of profit, independent of its truth value. There are consequences. I actually think that's a good thing for all of us.
I don't know.
I really do.
It just doesn't do it for me. And I think that I'm not alone here. So there's been a few more comments streaming through in the chat. Lawyer Will says, I thought the cases all got thrown out on a standing, so the claims were never substantively engaged with. And Gentry D says they dismissed them on standing. So that is, I think it's a counterpoint to what you're sort of building your argument on top of.
Fair enough.
Partially. And I think that's why I said this doesn't really do it for me. I think that we live in a time of two subjective realities, right? Two movies, one screen. And it was a wager. Fox made a wager, right? We had 75 million votes go to the incumbent president and 81 million votes go to the challenger. And in a course of events where overnight the vote tabulations skyrocketed in key battleground states, I think that Fox News made a wager. And I think that the easiest target of that wager was Dominion voting. So that's why I brought up, Will made the observation, doesn't augmenting, defamation still make you liable? Of course. And that's why I conceded that, if that's a question for damages, so be it. But I still am quite interested in how the zeitgeist was carrying this narrative. And Fox News is now the one that has the deepest pockets, and they're the ones that are going to be, at the end of the day, proven liable unless they settle, in which case it's the same thing. But I'm also, we're not ignorant of the fact that CNN has had to settle for similar issues. MSNBC, all of these news corporations have in some way, form, or fashion had to defend their actions by focusing more on the entertainment value of their programming rather than the factual accuracy or reporting. That's the time that we live in, Norm, period. And I think
fair enough.
And headlong into a TMZ style culture, I think that, to Thinking Man's point, maybe everything gets labeled that way.
Well, maybe, but I think at our peril. So on the standing issue,
of course.
On the standing issue, everybody is right. When but and so standing is a legal doctrine that says in order to advance a case or controversy in court, you have to have standing. That is, you have to be injured in cause or in fact, and the public at large can't bring a claim if there's no particular damage to them. And so standing was an issue in all of this litigation. And it may be that a trial would better serve because by portraying or showing to the public how Fox decided to decide, or how the manner in which it decided what's news. I don't fault any news organization, and I think this is partially Fox's defense, that initially it was simply reporting on claims made by others. So there's nothing wrong with Fox News saying President Donald Trump and Sidney Powell today filed a lawsuit asserting that the election was stolen and that these machines were hijacked. There's nothing wrong with saying that case was thrown out on grounds of standing, and the underlying question hasn't been answered. Were these Dominion machines in fact screwed with in a way to undermine the election? But at some point, I think people reached the conclusion, or maybe they didn't. I reached the conclusion. I'll own it only for myself.
They most certainly didn't. And here's why I say that.
Well, no, hold on a minute.
Okay.
No one has yet made the case in public that, in a way that I find persuasive, that the Dominion voting machines cooked the election. I think we all knew what was going to happen in 2020 because of the great number of absentee ballots, that there was going to be a blue wave after the red spike. And that's what happened. Now, it may be that there were problems with that blue wave. It may be that there were problems with the absentee ballots. It may be that we want to tidy up the counting procedure to avoid these kind of questions in the future and eliminate absentee ballots, or have Sunday voting so that everybody can get to the polls. There are lots of things we can do, but I don't think no one I know seriously believes that Cesar Chavez voting machines through the election. And I think Dominion is entitled to bring that case.
Well, and we've got in the chat, this is something that obviously the chat cares very much about, Norm, so I don't want to go away from this. Even for the next few minutes, we'll have to slot Clarence Thomas and the Texas judge for perhaps tomorrow. But I'm trying to keep up with the comments as they come in. So BTL, Bathtub Liquor, says, how can Fox be held responsible for reporting on what they see in the public sphere? Is that not the same way that the left-leaning organizations get out of facing the same dates? Which I think is what I already kind of brought up. Mm-hmm. T-Girl goes on top of that and said, well, who chastens CNN? The Steele dossier is just a nothing burger, which fair point. And I think that I find myself on the side of T-Girl, not on this issue, but a lot of other ones. BTL says, I would rather either have to suffer. I'm not sure what that says. Anyway, Gentry D says, no evidence was brought up. That's why they had J6 to stop the objections set up by the Uniparty for the military-industrial complex. I think that's you're going to have to develop that theory a little bit more for us to give it more credibility. Gentry D.
Sounds like you're looking for a place on InfoWars.
Lawyer Will says, if you change the rules to allow for ballot drop boxes and unsolicited mail-in ballots, I don't respect the results, which is a reference to the state-by-state changes right before the 2020 election, oftentimes in contravention to state law as to how those changes were to be made. I think Arizona was one of those key states, which is why we have continued to see the likes of Kerry Lake struggle there, Blake Masters struggle there. So I think that Lawyer Will, and again, none of this really gets at the whole Dominion voting issue.
Well, okay, and so I'm listening to these comments and I'm thinking, all right, don't settle. Let's have the trial. Because people are saying, well, what about the Steele dossier? What about CNN? Bring the action against CNN. This is a case where the purveyor of the technology, Dominion, brought an action saying that Fox was recklessly in disregard of the truth. It knew its machines didn't cook the election, and it continued to spread the claim that it did. And I think Dominion's entitled to bring that claim. Well, but I think the larger issue is, why can't people accept the results? And that is because there's a crisis of legitimacy in the
I will. Yeah, of course. We're on the same side of the fence there, Norm. But here's, in my opinion, why people can't accept that. And it is because, and I'll read a couple of comments here to help boost my point. Lawyer Will says, I recall after the 2004 election, there was plenty of reporting about supposed issues with ballot machines, right? And he even acknowledges that the Dominion voting machine argument wasn't persuasive. But this is what I mean. I believe that the real issue the dissonance, however suffered on either side, is that there is an acknowledgement by the conservative side of politics today that institutional power, cultural power is wielded by the political left en masse. And so there are all of these lingering questions which should be examined on their merits. But for whatever reason, we don't get that sort of follow-up, right? We just don't get it. It's a black box, it's obfuscated. And then these are the opportunities for those things to be examined, and yet it's not really, again, the proper forum. Here, the title of this, Norm, is "Will Mistrust by the Court Coerce Settlement?" That was a reference to sanctions by the judge against Fox on Saturday, or it was reported on Saturday, but at the end of the week, sanctions against Fox's attorneys because they failed to disclose that Rupert Murdoch was a member of the board at the time that this lawsuit was launched, or at the time that the alleged facts transpired. And that seems to be so. I think you shake your head at that, right? But that's what's being reported, right?
No, I get that. No, but I mean, here's the problem. I mean, courts are places where we go to have disputes resolved by neutral principles, by neutral fact finders. And it seems to me that we're getting to a point where whenever we get to a difficult decision, we're attacking the judges. So, the very premise that because the judge entertained sanctions on a failure to disclose, Fox is going to settle because it's lost confidence in the courts or doesn't trust the judge, that's contributing to the same narrative. And at some point, things just are what they are. Now, I don't know enough about the sanctions that might be leveled against Fox for failure to disclose discovery stuff. I know a lot about discovery sanctions from the Jones case, and I disagree with how the court assessed them, and will take an appeal on that. But, I don't want to see this become an attack on the judiciary, because as far as I'm concerned, and maybe this is just, special pleading as a trial lawyer, the courts are about all we have left. I'm about ready. I'm about 15, 20 minutes from walking into a courtroom this morning in day 70 of the Proud Boys case, where there's going to be a lot of tension in the air, and it's a high stakes game, and people aren't happy with the judge and his decisions, depending on the day or the decision. But yet we keep coming back to him in the confidence and in the hope that justice will be done. What happens if we lose the hope that justice can be done in a courtroom? Where are we going to go for it then?
Well, that is the issue, but I think that disparity in coverage is the key here, right? At bottom, and Lawyer Will continues to harp on that. He says, go back to 2004 and Diebold and see the way that was covered. And I think that we don't even have to go back to 2004. I think we can look at Stacey Abrams in Georgia. We can look at Hillary Clinton in 2016. These aren't novel ways to handle election losses.
Okay, and they're all good points, and let's return to it tomorrow, because I'm out of time. I object, Mike.
Overruled, Norm.
Overruled. How can you do that? I feel right at home.
Every single day.
So tomorrow we will resume this discussion. I see I'm in the minority here today, and plenty of people think that I've swallowed the candy ass pill, and maybe I have.
Candy ass Norm, baby.
But my objective here, I'm telling you what I see in this, and if I'm missing things, I want to be open to hear what you have to say, and I'm simply asking that you be open to what I have to say. I operate on the assumption that there is a universe of people with reasonable minds, and that reasonable minds can agree, if not on substance, at least on method and how to come to agreement. And then we'll have to debate how much weight to give the differing variables. And I think that's what's at stake in our world, and that's our commitment here in Law and Legitimacy.
Well, let's string this theme throughout the week. Certainly in the context of Justice Clarence Thomas, we can talk about this same theme within a different set of facts. And even when we go to the judge in Texas on the abortion pharmaceutical issue, we can string that same theme.
We'll do it. All right.
Let's do that tomorrow and throughout the week. Thank you, everybody, for being here. If you haven't listened to the AMA that we had on Friday, I encourage you to go back and listen to that. You can find us here every morning, 7:45 a.m. All we ask is a thumbs up, and consider becoming a member. Good luck, candy ass. You're still overruled, though.
You hurt both my feelings.
You guys know the plug. We'll see you tomorrow morning. See you, Norm. Have a good day.
Ciao. I object.